Hey, and welcome back to the BotPod in our Tech Talk series, where we delve into the amazing world of robotics and AI. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Marie-Axelle, a GTM strategy leader in the retail but also robotics space. So, Marie-Axelle, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. Well, today's episode is all around how I guess AI-driven robotics and IoT solutions are really reshaping retail. So we'll be talking about anything from fulfillment to in-store operations and what it really takes to scale, integrate, and leverage these systems successfully. But before we get into all of it, it'd be great, Marie-Axelle, if you can give us a bit of introduction on you. You've had such an interesting journey from CCO at Ocado to advising Brightpick, StrongPoint, and now leading business development and growth initiatives at Nomagic and Staxel. So yeah, how did you first get into retail and eventually warehousing robotics? And what kind of drew you to the go-to-market strategy side of the industry?
Well, interestingly enough, I worked many years in retail. And when I say retail, I mean store-based retail as well as e-commerce. Many years ago, I was working for Disney. I was working for Disney Consumer Products, and I launched mail order catalogs of Disney merchandise. And that was around 1995, and the e-commerce was kind of starting, and I realized very quickly that mail order, paper-based catalogs were going to be replaced by online. And I'm glad I got this intuition because I actually started in e-commerce in 1997. Um, I studied business and I majored in marketing, but I was super interested in anything IT many years ago. I first heard about artificial intelligence in, shall I say it, 1984. Um, the concept, the expression existed already, and the concept was very interesting. Uh, I coded when I was younger, but if I tell you that I coded in BASIC and in COBOL, people are going to be laughing, and that actually betrays my age. So I was interested. Studying marketing made me super interested in CPG and retail. Retail was a passion from when I was a student. I was super interested in retail, but I was also interested in technology. So e-commerce was kind of natural. After Disney, I worked for e-commerce startups during the first internet bubble around 2000. And then I was hired by Staples, the US office supplies retailer, as their first head of e-commerce in Europe. And I launched e-commerce for Staples first in Germany and then in the UK. And something that people don't know, because office supplies have died, we no longer buy office supplies, and companies buy much less office supplies than they used to. But for a long time, office supplies e-commerce websites were leading websites in Europe. My boss at Staples moved on to Sephora, and he called me and he said, "You launched e-commerce for Staples. Can you launch e-commerce for Sephora?" So 20 years ago, exactly in June of 2005, I launched e-commerce for Sephora in France. And then, because the numbers were super good at the end of the year, LVMH said, "Can you do the same in China?" Because LVMH is the owner of Sephora, as some people don't know. So I went to China, launched e-commerce for Sephora in China in 2006, when there were 4 Sephora stores in China, no brand awareness, and barely any e-commerce in China. Believe it or not, in 2006, there was barely any e-commerce in China. And then I worked on increasing Sephora stores' presence across the globe And this may not sound like it, but it's got a link with why I'm working in retail robotics now. So I wrote business plans for entry of Sephora into Hungary, into the Baltics, into Ukraine, into Turkey, into India, into Malaysia and Singapore, and a few other countries. And what I realized when I was working on writing these strategies and business plans for entry of Sephora into various markets is that labor is the main or one of the two main costs of store-based retail. If you look at different countries, in some countries, your rent is going to be your number one cost when you open physical stores. In other countries, your labor is going to be your number one cost. But labor and rent, as I'm always telling the founder of Staxel, and we can come back to Staxel later on, labor and space, or labor and rent, are the main costs of running a store-based business. What else did I do? After working on Sephora's international development and actually setting up Sephora's business in Turkey, I was hired by IBM as a global retail expert. Well, actually, before that, I was also hired by Javelin Group, a UK consultancy specialized in retail, where I developed a portfolio of leading retailers where I advised on omnichannel strategies. Then I was hired by IBM as a global retail expert. And from IBM, I was hired by Ocado as the very first chief commercial officer of Ocado Solutions way back in 2018. And when I joined Ocado, I knew nothing about robotics. I knew a lot about retail. I knew a lot about grocery retail. I knew a lot about software. I didn't know anything about robotics. But I knew about the pain of online grocery, about picking 45 items. Typically, an Ocado order in the UK has between 45 and 50 items. And picking 45 to 50 items is labor expensive. Hence, the automation and the robotics that Ocado developed first for themselves and then sold to third-party retailers. After Ocado, I briefly worked for a multinational in Switzerland and then went back to robotics. I was hired by Brightpeak when they were Photoneo launching an offer for online grocery, and I helped them with their GTM strategy for what is now called Brightpeak. I was an advisor to StrongPoint when they become an auto store reseller. StrongPoint is very much specialized in grocery retail solutions, based out of Norway, selling a variety of solutions from electronic shelf labels to storage and retrieval via their AutoStore partnership. They sell a variety of solutions. I was an advisor when they launched their AutoStore offering. I'm now doing two things, and I love being fractional and working for various people in various geographies and on various topics. I'm working with a founder in London who is building what we call robotic nano-stores or robotic mini-stores. And when I tell someone I'm working in robotic mini-stores or nano-stores, people look at me and they said, what exactly are you doing? So robotic nano-stores, let's say, are much better vending machines or unmanned small stores. And we can come back to this. So I'm doing GTM and for Staxel based out of London. And then recently I started working with a robotic arm company in Warsaw called Nomagic. I didn't mention that I also worked for an online grocery solution provider called Finally, which went out of business in July of this year. Online grocery over the past 8 years or 7 or 8 years has been kind of my specialty. I'm now selling robotic arms or knocking on the doors of fashion retailers and fashion e-commerce players to sell them fashion robotic picking. So I'm going beyond my online grocery specialty and venturing into fashion now.
I mean, you've had such an interesting career trajectory, and I think when you look back at it, like your scope was so wide. And I think what really interests me is how you went from e-commerce as like a global commercial domain overarching into the past 8 years where you've really stepped into robotics in terms of retail warehousing. So I guess if we like zoom into the past 8, 10 years or so, or like, Ocado days more recently, like, we're talking about robotics starting in the warehouse and those fulfillment centers. But now obviously looking into what you guys do with Staxel, we're seeing it on the store floor as well in terms of these nano stores you mentioned. So what do you think is like driving this shift, except for it being, just the labor intensity of on real world storefronts?
So as I said, I realized when I was working in physical stores that labor was one of the main costs of running a store-based retail business. I also remembered last night that when I launched e-commerce for Sephora in France in 2005, we had to kind of repurpose a part of the warehouse that was used for European store replenishment. So Sephora was running replenishment for most of their European stores, and I'm talking 20 years ago, from a single warehouse in Orléans in the center of France. And they would replenish stores in Spain, in Portugal, in the Czech Republic, in Poland from that single location. But they would, actually do piece picking because cosmetic store replenishment is what at the time was compared to pharmacy replenishment, i.e. for pharmacy replenishment, you may send one vaccine, one flu vaccine, or one, you do unit picking. So they were doing unit picking, but just for store replenishment. And we kind of repurposed an area of the warehouse to actually handle e-commerce orders. The average number of units we had when we launched e-commerce in France was 2.5 units per order, which is much less than the 45 or 50 units you get in an online grocery order. So we repurposed a part of the warehouse, but it was so manual. I was visualizing how we did it. It was people walking to the shelf. So it was a people to goods system. They would batch pick and then they would sort on the trolley, but it was batch picking, people walking. And then when I joined Ocado, I realized that a very simple thing, but I remember the day I was told this when I joined Ocado is nobody wants to pay people for walking. And when a picker is walking to a shelf, walking through an aisle, basically you are paying people to walk. Hence, what I discovered and when I was selling, when I was at Ocado, was first thing, it was goods to people. So people were not walking, people were being presented the goods. So I was always talking about, when I talk about still to these days, when I speak about storage and retrieval, I actually talk about mobile shelves and shelves moving to the picker, because 20 years ago, when I set up fulfillment at the Orléans warehouse for Sephora e-commerce, it was actually people walking to fixed static shelves. So I discovered moving shelves. Ocado was very much about automating storage and retrieval. What I was selling when I was selling the solution to third-party grocers didn't have any automated picking in those days. So I remember I was hired by Ocado. They had not told me much about this solution. I had lots of interviews, but I was never shown this solution. I joined Ocado. I moved to the UK, and week 1, I'm being shown an automated warehouse. And I had watched the videos, I had read the articles, I had done lots of preparation, I had read the annual report, etc. But I didn't realize that picking in the Ocado warehouses was still manual. Storage and retrieval was being automated, which again is much better than walking the aisles to actually collect goods for all the prep. But I was kind of disappointed that picking was not automated. So I'm now selling, knocking on the doors of retailers across Europe to sell them the Nomagic robotic arm. So beyond storage and retrieval, picking is now what is massively being automated. And then all the consolidation, van or truck loading, etc. The reason why retailers and 3PLs need automation is that it's very hard to find labor. It's hard to find labor post-COVID because people have decided that they don't want to do jobs that are either boring or hard or both. A year ago, I was in an online grocery fulfillment center in Munich. And the fulfillment center manager told me, we're in Germany, I've got 0 German employees because Germans do not want to work in warehouses or fulfillment centers. So I said, how do you cope? He said, I have Polish employees who moved to Germany 15 years ago and are settled in Germany. I also have Ukrainian women who moved to Germany when the war broke out, and their husbands are in Ukraine fighting, but the women are working in Germany. But these women are doctors, nurses, dentists. They will not stay in warehouses and fulfillment centers very long. When the war is over, some of them will stay in Germany, some will go back to Ukraine. And if they stay in Germany, they'd rather be working as nurses and dentists and doctors than pick orders in an online grocery fulfillment center. So immigration, as we know, is problematic from a political standpoint in many countries. If we look at the Ukrainian source of labor, it's probably very temporary. So many retailers, many 3PLs are looking at actually automating because there's no turnover in robots. You don't need to retrain the robots. Robots don't take holidays. Robots don't go on strike in France. And some robots, because of all the AI, are actually self-learning. And also the AI is learning. You train the AI in your robotic arms. You don't need to spend hours training and retraining your robots. So robots have lots of advantages when labor is scarce or labor is expensive or getting more expensive for many reasons, or turnover is very high. So anybody who sells robotics will address cost of labor scarcity and cost of labor issues. Somebody who tells me otherwise is actually lying to themselves and lying to their clients. The main driver of buying robotics when you are in the retail industry, whether you're working in a warehouse, a fulfillment center, or physical store. The reason why you are buying, installing, deploying robots and robotics is about cost of labor, labor scarcity, and cost of labor.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, this is a conversation I have quite often about not just the cost of labor, but an aging population and what people are willing to do as well. Whereas, 10, 15 years ago, a workforce would do what we call hard labor, manual labor. And now there's like a much lower adoption and willingness for people to step into that. Or, there's varied education entrants that people are using to do something different more, whether it's remote, but no one wants to be traveling to a warehouse to be a pick a packer, and if they are they using an exoskeleton to help support them pick and pack and things like that? So I think you spoke about a really interesting migration of when you first entered this kind of robotics realm, from it being just an auto store or that kind of space fit, now into the picking side of it as well, where people as you don't want to pay people to walk. So that's kind of two trends that have like emerged and we're kind of working through. But once we've done the auto store and the retrieval and we've done the picker packing, what do you see as kind of the next step past this in like 3PL and robotics for retail?
So what's really going to change retail, what's going to change e-commerce is autonomous driving. So I love anecdotes, and I'm going to tell you one anecdote. When I was at Ocado Solutions, we sold our solution to the #2 grocery retailer in Japan called Ian. And as you know, Japan has a declining population. They're losing between 500,000 and 1 million people per year. Immigration is a problem. 10 years ago, they had 500,000 immigrants. They now have 3.8 million. I was in Japan recently. I was at a convenience store. I spoke to the salesperson spoke to me. The cashier spoke to me. And she spoke very good English. And I looked at her. I said, "You're not Japanese." She was from Nepal. There are not lots of Nepalese people working in convenience stores in Tokyo. But that's problematic for the Japanese population. That's really problematic. So again, a country where immigration is a problem. So we sold the solution to a Japanese retailer. They've built Ocado-powered fulfillment centers in Tokyo. They've launched this very good and well-adopted online grocery offering. I was talking to the British guy who's based in Tokyo and has been working on this project since we signed the contract in November of 2019. And he was telling me recently, he said, "Marie-Axelle, this is going well, but we are constrained by the lack of driving labor." If you go to Tokyo, you jump into a taxi, you notice that the taxi drivers are super old. Every taxi driver in Tokyo is well above 75 years old of age. And the problem with all e-commerce in Japan, not just online grocery, but also non-food e-commerce, is the lack of delivery labor. So you can manage this through lockers and, click and collect from stores or better from lockers. But with grocery, home, getting your food delivered to home is the best customer experience, much better than going to a drive-through like in France or going to a 3-temperature locker to collect your order. But the growth of online grocery in Japan is constrained by the lack of human labor to actually deliver online grocery orders. The next breakthrough in all e-commerce, whether grocery or non-food, is going to be autonomous driving. I cannot wait for autonomous delivery to actually be a reality, because this is going to change supply chain management. The founder of Staxel, whom I'm working with, he has a past in autonomous driving. And if you want to discuss autonomous driving, you should interview Dima, because he really understands that, the next breakthrough is going to be autonomous driving. Now, the big question is, when is autonomous driving going to be a reality? And what exactly are we automating? Are we automating driving from a fulfillment center to a cross-docking facility, and then we're using human labor? Or are we automating everything? Do robots actually bring the groceries to your fridge like an Ocado driver would do? So there are lots of challenges, but autonomous driving is really going to be the next breakthrough in moving products. Because it's all about moving products, supply chain management, fulfillment. It's all about moving products from one place to another place.
Definitely. And I always had a little passion point for autonomous driving and autonomous mobility. And there are so many teams for last mile delivery solutions that I think are really interesting. And I think a lot of it, unfortunately, especially for us in the UK and Europe, it's that risk of adoption piece of people being so risk averse and not open to these new toolings and new technologies. I mean, back in the day when Uber first came out, black cab drivers hated the concept, or when in Tesco you had self-service checkouts, cashiers hated the concept. And 20 years later, it's just so the norm. I think we could go on to a really big tangent and go into the autonomous driving piece, but we'll stick to retail and we'll move on. But I love that that's your kind of vision. If we've done these parts, now it's that full delivery and solution delivery life cycle. And I think, as you kind of introduced as well, when you initially spoke about yourself, robots is just one piece of this puzzle. You spoke about AI, you first heard about I don't know, coming up to 40 years or so ago. So AI, Internet of Things, they're all massive key players in this. It's not just a one size fits all and a one approach kind of is pick a packers or whatever. So how do you think not just AI, but the IoT kind of piece helps retailers kind of capture these smarter insights in real time? And I think if we talk about inventory, merchandising, understanding customer behavior, talk to me about this Internet of Things, and once you've got the data, how this can really drive change for retailers and warehousing 3PL teams.
So IoT in warehouses and fulfillment centers everywhere, measuring temperature, whatever, measuring lots of things. So IoT in warehouses is kind of a reality. It's there. And I'm not a specialist of industrial IoT, so I will not elaborate on IoT and sensors in warehouses and fulfillment centers. What I'm finding super interesting, and I was at NRF Europe last week, and there were lots of discussions around something that has been of interest to me over the past 2 years, is in-store analytics and actually using IoT to get better in-store analytics. I'm realizing, having done both e-commerce and having opened and managed physical stores, I'm realizing that, retailers know a lot about what's happening on a website. You know everything. How long I do well on a given page, how many pages I've seen, how long I stayed on the website, when I connected, when I left, what I put in my basket, whether I checked out or not. They know everything. I realized that, after 25 years or 30 years of e-commerce, store-based retailers or omni-channel retailers got actually frustrated about not knowing as much about what's going on in the stores as they know about what's going on a website, in an app, etc. So there's this appetite for having the in-store Google Analytics, if you want, or the in-store web analytics. I'm not going to name brands, but we know. So over the past 2 years, I've spoken to many startups in various geographies using various technologies, and looking at three things actually. Well, two things. Being able to measure foot traffic, but not just as we were doing 20 years ago, where we had a counter at the entrance of the store and we could actually count incoming visitors. And I remember people who worked in stores were actually instructed to kneel down. So when going out to lunch, coming back to the store, we were being asked to kneel down so that the counter would not detect us and count us many times, because we were like getting in the morning, getting out for lunch, coming back. So we couldn't be counted multiple times, and we were not potential shoppers, we were just workers in the stores. So the counters counted. They counted bodies, and they did, and they didn't know whether the bodies were men, women, they couldn't detect the age, blah, blah, blah. So that was 20 or 25 years ago. Now I'm seeing lots of technologies, computer vision, IoT, things that actually help you detect who comes into the store and where they go. Where are they going? Are they going, when you visit a store, I don't know if you know this, but when you visit a store, most people tend to go on the right side first. So the natural way of visiting a store for most people, especially if you're right-handed, you go right. You didn't know that, right?
I'm also left-handed.
You're left-handed, so maybe you go left. But most of the people actually first go right and then go in a circle. But retailers didn't know where people would do well and where people would never go. Of course, signage helps, promotions help, signage really helps. But now with various types of technologies, and I remember iBeacon 10 years ago that were launched by Apple and didn't work very well, but I discussed with iBeacon with someone at NRF Europe last week, so it came back. The beacon technology is coming back. So lots of IoT devices to actually measure where foot traffic is going, not just foot traffic numbers, but where foot traffic is going. And also lots of sensors and robots to actually assess whether a product is in stock at a given moment, whether it needs to be replenished. So shelf presence of each and every single item. So I've seen lots of interesting technologies last week. I'm not super clear yet on what's best, and I need to do a little bit more of research and speak to additional people. But turning the store into a website, well, knowing as much as what happens in a physical store as what happens on a website is a super heavy trend at the moment. You may have devices in your lighting that actually measure from above, and I've seen companies doing this. I've seen companies putting sensors in the signage. So instead of having static signage that just indicates the way to go or what's in this department, you've actually got IoT in the signage that measure foot traffic and can identify the kind of visitors, and can also measure retail media audience. So it's good to sell retail space in your store to advertisers, but you need to measure your audience. So IoT is also, the IoT technologies are also about measuring eyeballs. And that's something we do actually at Staxel. We're able to measure the number of people who look at our mini stores or better vending machines, mini stores, mini nano-robotic stores, robotic nano stores. We were able to measure the number of people who look at the nano store. We were able to identify whether they're men, women. We were able to measure the age as well, or assess the age of the people who are looking. So this is exactly what's needed in physical stores if you want to deploy a real retail media network and a real with audience measurement.
Mm. And I think that will probably lead us on quite nicely to talking a bit more about like Staxel. And this is how you and me first met, right? Or even maybe leaning onto Nomagic as well a bit. Like, so these nano stores, I've seen Staxel in action. I've used Staxel in action. I know there's kind of a vision system. It can basically tries to tell your age. Maybe it's not exactly perfect, but it'll be quite close. It can tell your mood. You can ask it questions. It can, it has a lot programmed into it for that data. But how do you kind of approach taking these either like robotic or like nano store style solutions really like to market and kind of making it a success when we're talking to investors and retailers to actually implement these or get these as plug and play solutions?
So going back to labor shortages, we recently spoke to a potential Japanese client, and they told us exactly what I've been telling you about driving labor. They said that basically they run convenience stores in Japan. The convenience stores in Japan are open 24 hours 7. They're manned 24 hours 7. So I tested this in Tokyo. I visited stores at 5 a.m. Thank you, jet lag. And I visited convenience stores at 5 a.m. There was one employee. Probably the owner, because most of the convenience stores are actually franchises. Yeah. So these guys are the owner of this specific franchise store. So the guy was there at 5 a.m. But with the declining and declining population and the aging remaining population, convenience stores operators in Japan are worried about manning the stores, and they're moving towards unmanned solutions. So they're super interested in what we're building. As you see, you saw when you visited Staxel, we're also super good as an anti-theft device because the products are protected behind glass and retrieved only when somebody orders a few products. Japan doesn't have a theft problem. Japan is the safest country in the world and people don't steal. Japan doesn't have a theft problem. The US has a theft problem. Europe has a theft problem. And we're currently working on deploying Staxel within supermarkets in Ireland and in the UK to actually protect premium items. So because theft in the US and theft in Europe is really a problem. As you saw when you visited Staxel, we're not using a robotic arm in the Staxel nano store. Some people who build autonomous stores are using robotic arms. The reason why we're not using robotic arms, and I'm working in robotic arms, so I should have so robotic arms to Staxel, but we're not using robotic arms because robotic arms are very expensive. We are using a cheaper technology. So the engineering team at Staxel has developed a very, very clever and cheaper solution. Coming back to the GTM, Japan, it's all about labor scarcity and replacing labor in convenience stores. This week, we were in a meeting with a leading European grocery retailer, and they told us about launching an unmanned retail chain. So this is coming to Europe. Not Amazon Go, not, something different. And we could be part of the adventure. Of course, I cannot tell you more because I'm under strict NDA, but the idea of unmanned stores is very attractive to retailers across the globe. Labor scarcity, labor costs. You've probably read the news yesterday. Amazon Go is actually, closing down all their UK stores and turning them into Whole Foods traditional stores. But the idea of removing labor, expensive labor or hard to find labor from physical store is a long-term trend. And of course, Staxel is capitalizing on this trend.
Super interesting. I guess as you kind of mentioned on like the GTM side, kind of what you sound like you've taken from e-com and like early stage Ocado days is really that kind of focus on labor from various aspects, from cost, time, training, retraining. It's a really interesting kind of piece that we've followed through in this conversation today. And I love that's kind of been not just your focus, but quite evidently when you're looking at new startups spin out all the time, or the companies you've been involved with over the past 4 or 5 years or so, is really this focus on changing the way we work, or changing how the labor force is used effectively. Of course, there's a reduction in number of these like employees in warehouses, but it's how we also retraining and reskilling these individuals into different areas as well. I think, I guess, oh, sorry.
I want to say something. So when we talk about robotic picking at Nomagic, some people across Europe, especially in Southern Europe, say, oh, I cannot replace humans with robotic arms or robots. I will have a reputation. I will have a reputation problem. I cannot do this. And all technologies. You couldn't replace the woman who washed your laundry by a washing machine because she would have been unemployed. So the big question is, would you rather retrain as a robotics engineer or robotics technician who work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. rather than picking online grocery orders from 5 a.m. to 12 p.m.? Do you want a, my French family is kind of shocked that I sell robotics and that I cut jobs in some geographies. But, don't be sorry. I mean, working in warehouses, working in fulfillment centers, replenishing shelves in physical stores. My son did it. He worked in grocery retail. He's seen it. He's done it. He's replenished shelves. He can understand robotics because he said it was not the easiest job. And he's glad he's not doing this for the rest of his life. But retrain the replenishers and the pickers and the forklift drivers, retrain them to actually build robotics if they've got the appetite to do something slightly more complicated, slightly more qualified. I think we're removing very hard jobs, actually.
Oh, I definitely agree. And as you look into it, that automation is not just something that's only just come about. It's been an evolving solution over the past, God, what, 20, 30, 40 years. It's just sometimes you hear this burst more about it because there's someone that's really adopted it and it's gone to market really well, or it's become more evident in people's real world daily lives. And I think that, some people don't think about it. So they think it's really new or really novel or really scary. And then there's people who are like, no, this is just reshaping what we do in slightly different ways. So I think for me, it's been a really interesting conversation that we've had today. And I think, the links into not just labor shortages, but, retraining the labour workforce and rethinking what labour is in the future for this evolution of work is a really cool topic. And I guess that leads me to Marie-Axelle. I really appreciate you jumping on today. Thank you so much for making the time. And it's been so great to chat. I always love your anecdotes and stories throughout your career. And I personally have always learned a lot from chatting to you. And I'm sure the people listening to this podcast today have listened and learned to a lot too. But from me, yeah, stay tuned for the next episode of the BotPod. And I really look forward to hopefully having you on again.
Thank you. It's been great. I love this.